G'day everyone, and how you going on this great day, 30th October 2025? Welcome to the Global Update. Um, Stephen Petith here, giving you a update of the world as I see it. Um, just quickly type in if you can hear me okay. I think everything's going fine. Sorry, I'm just checking that. Excellent. All right, here we go. Um, Global trends, things are going left, right, and center out in the world as we see it at the moment. There is so much happening. It's it's hard to distill down um, what we should and what we shouldn't uh, put into these updates. But there is just so much going on. It's not funny. So I've just picked a few topics and we'll get into them. US government shutdown. I've been basically had this for the last 3 weeks, and I can't see it stopping anytime soon. We're day 29 now, um, and it's slowly getting worse and worse and worse for um, pretty much everyone in the US. As the money starts to dry up in different departments, different things are starting to grind to a halt, and it I can't see where they're going to come to some form of agreement to open it up. Some parts of the government are doing well because there is no one leading them, and other parts are in absolute chaos. And some of that is their welfare uh, system and their health system for the underprivileged people. That gets the worst hit during this, and it seems that it's going to do. The Democrats keep blaming Trump, but at the end of the day, 100% of the Republicans have voted to reopen the government, and none of the Democrats. And without 60 votes to override and reopen the government, the Dems are the only ones doing the damage. And they are continually going to do the damage. They think it's going to help them in the midterms, but it's actually doing them damage. So, uh, it needs so it's 53. So 7 to 8 Dems need to cross the floor, vote with the Republicans, get the government open if they want to stem the tide. But I don't think they do. They're so ideologically driven now that they would cut their own throats just to say, just to stop the other side from getting a win. And the next stop after this, if it doesn't open, the next stop after this type of stuff, we start seeing the breakdown of civil rule. And I don't mean that just because you're seeing, the protesters from Antifa and that. I mean proper civil rule breakdown. You have massive splits in military and police and government officials. So you end up with Venezuela style governance. And that is where the US is headed if they don't come to an end of this shutdown. A real surprise thing that happened during the week was Javier Milei in Argentina won the midterms, and he won big. Um, it just goes to show you over and over again, wherever these politicians are coming through with big, sensible policies, bringing their country back into the middle rather than stupid leftist ideology, or even to the far right. There is some parts and some people that have gone too far the other way, and when it comes back to the middle, it works. Argentina is normally controlled by a coalition, and Milei was in a coalition up until the point of these midterms where he's got 40% of the vote. I think it's closer to 41% of the vote overall, which is translated into 13 out of 24 Senate seats, which means he's now got control in the Senate, and he's got 64 out of the 127 lower house seats. And that gives him full control now in the lower house. So he can go harder and faster. So it's really, really good to see. And it just shows you, if you get behind some sensible policies and do some sensible stuff, the people will back you. And I wish we would see that here in Australia, but we're just not there yet. I don't think there's enough pain in the population to actually to warrant it here. But that was a very, very good outcome, especially for Argentina. It's just going to make Argentina go from strength to strength, and it's attracting money. When you have really good outcomes, people want to stay, people want to invest, and people want to grow. So that's a really good win for Argentina. This was another one that come through, and it and it shows where different parts of the world are at. And so China is basically the head of the BRICS formations, and the US is the leader of the West. But Xi needs come out, and he purged 9 generals, most of them from the eastern side, and a couple of them off his own Politburo, which is like, these are people in the inner circle. He's consolidating power, but he's already got a very strong power base. Now, for him to come out and do this, I believe he's staving off internal coup, and that he is basically stopping people from, as they say, giving him a lead breakfast, and taking over through a very let's say a very brutal end to his reign. So at the CCP meeting that was just held, a sixth of the delegates, so what's that? That's sixth of the delegates, about 18% of all delegates were missing. They did not show up. They were either people that were purged or were frightened of being purged. He was doing it through, I'm cleaning up corruption, but he's already cleaned up corruption. And done that for us. This was literally an attack on his opposition from within inside his own faction, those that are starting to come from provinces in China that are very much hurting. And his communist drive in China has basically seen the production and the prosperity of people in China diminish a great deal. So people that I know on the ground over there, they gauge the prosperity of the towns they're in by how many people are around delivering food. And a couple of guys have come back to me and said, there used to be cafes where the Moi2 drivers used to hang out, and he said there would be 30 or 50 of them there. Now there's 2 or 3. And that just goes to show you that the economic output in China has just diminished to such a point that the extra spending is no longer there. But it's not just the extra spending, is the migrant workers have turned around and moved back. So the villages are now got more and more people, and more people have gone back to the farms, gone back to their local villages, which is creating more and more of economy outside of the larger cities. But the generals and the very wealthy that control the eastern seaboard are losing a lot of money. And it's all down to the policies that have been put in place since Xi took over in 2005, and especially the policies from 2015 onwards that have basically, the last 10 years have really changed the driving forces internally. So watch this space. if Xi does another round of purges of people very close to him, I would say it basically means that he's on his last legs, and that it's only a matter of time before he is deposed. The tariffs that Donald Trump put on um, have had an effect as well, especially with exports, and with companies looking for new places to go. A lot of Chinese are doing um, relocations of factories into Vietnam and other places around Asia where there is lower tariffs. So China's in for its own ups and downs, the same as the rest of the world, and we're seeing this all over the place. And this is all precursor to war. Um, it's precursor to the upheaval of the old world order, being the US and the West, and the new rise, which is going to be China, India, Russia, and the Asian world. They all have their own internal turmoils. Russia's starting to go through it. We're seeing it in Vietnam. We're seeing it in India. As they rise up and they work themselves out, they will have internal conflicts. But once all that's happened, the flow of money and everything will move, and the power will move over there. So very, very uncertain times for a lot of people in a lot of places around the world. Trump in Asia, a whirlwind 5-day trip. He came out, started in Malaysia. I think it was the APEC Leaders Summit, um, and he, did the peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia, which was quite an interesting thing. Got that done. He then moved on to Japan. He also did a rare earths deal with Malaysia, a rare earths deal with Japan, and one with South Korea. So he is making sure that they have enough rare earth supply. And I would say, because he's done the deals with other countries, is um, one deal that was done with Albo may not be as strong as what everyone thinks. And Trump is hedging his bets and making sure that he's got his own supply. Once again, American first. The entire trip was about promoting America first and making sure that everyone knew it, especially with the new leader in Japan. She's really going to have a tough time uh, in Japan. But um, it'll be an interesting outcome to see where Japan sits itself, and whether they can stop all their internal bickering as well. They've got a long road to climb. South Korea has been a very good friend of Trump's for a number of years, and more so under the current leadership in South Korea and um, in the US. He didn't drop in to see little Kim in North Korea. Apparently, that's planned for early next year. But the meeting with Xi on the tariffs couldn't have come for a better time for Xi. Trump has the upper hand, and there will be a lot of toing and froing. The tariffs have been dropped back to 46%, I think that is now. And that was mainly done as of today. And so it was a quick trip in Asia, but for America, very, very good. It really pushed through the America first. Um, Hosting the Japanese Prime Minister on the USS aircraft carrier George Washington was a big coup. That was in Yokosuka in Japan, which is a big military base there. And it just goes to show you that the ties between certain countries in Asia are stronger than others. So quite a very interesting trip by Trump. Very quick. Um, Hit the points that he wanted, and he's back home now. This is, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. it once again, it just shows you where the world is at with war. And Trump put out basically just before his meeting with Xi Jinping, so yesterday, um, that the US would start nuclear testing, weapons testing again after a 30-year ban. It was brought in place in 1993 from memory, that they were 1992, that they would stop testing all nuclear weapons as the Cold War had finished and there was no other major threat. So they stopped it, which then in turn, with the downfall of the USSR, they stopped testing. And then it was only rogue nations that were testing weapons, Iran, Pakistan, North Korea, and so forth. All the major nuclear countries, nuclear weapons countries, all stopped testing. The US being the largest, followed by Russia. So the US and Russia, I don't know if people realize that between them, they've still got a shit ton of nuclear weapons. It's about 1,500 to 2,000 nuclear weapons each. Then China, being the third largest, is around 1,000, and then it dramatically drops off back to France, the UK, and so forth, all the way down to the people that have got one. And it's those with one weapon, so you got to be probably more frightened of than those with 1,000. So, but it just goes to show you again where the world is at. The neocons are definitely in control of the war powers in the US, and um, and it also shows you that the US is feeling weak in its position of being the number one power. So Trump is trying to rectify its position in the world. The US military is in a major transition, the same as most Western militaries. They have been deteriorated over the last 25 years, and last 30 years, especially since the 90s, where technology and usage of equipment has faded off. Now, is this a direct response to um, threats that they may have been picking up through the intelligence sectors? Not sure, but once again, it just goes to show you that war is coming, and I would hate to be in um, Europe at the moment because the Europe militaries are so depleted, and still so run by lefty loonies that if a war come tomorrow, they'd be wiped out in about 30 seconds. Because I don't think the US would react, especially under Trump. I just don't think he would wade in. It'd be a World War II all over again. They would need a direct attack on the US for them to wade in. And that leads to the other order that come through was Project Janus, which is the US Army is going nuclear. And when we say the US Army is leading this for the entire Department of War. And it's to create micronuclear reactors that can produce up to 20 megawatts of power and are transportable, whether by plane, truck, train, boat, hot air balloon, spacecraft, whatever. And um, they they've guaranteed two will be produced very, very quickly, and installed and operating. Now, this is for a number of reasons. In my thing is, one, if they can produce their own power without having to connect to um, local grids. For instance, Guantanamo Bay in Cuba is connected to the Cuban electricity grid as much as it produces its own power. Um, so they could deploy one, two, three of these into a place like that and have it 100% self-sufficient with power. And they'd be able to run large data centers on military bases. So the more and more that the military goes autonomous, the more and more computing power that it needs, and they cannot rely on local grids or diesel generation for that. Because if your supply lines get cut, you don't have diesel generation. You have no power, right? And predominantly in war zones, especially in places like Afghanistan and the Middle East, where they've been operating, they've been doing a lot of diesel generation for their energy. So this is a massive step and a massive preparation for war, as it will mean that they can really ramp up the amount of power they want. They can run in-country data centers and their own networks, and not be reliant on third-party energy sources, because these reactors are supposed to last 10 to 15 years on the fuel sources that they've got, which means that you don't have to refuel them for a very long time, which means you have autonomy in that sector. This was a very telling announcement that they're pushing this very heavily. And it goes along the lines of what places like Australia are really going to have to work out. If we want to be a first world nation going forward with all the technological advances that we need, we are going to have to become heavily reliant on nuclear to do it. This was a very sneaky attack. Um, the UN's International Maritime Organization um, put out, uh, started back in 2023, back in 23, maybe a bit earlier. They started to set up regulations for um, international shipping, and and what um, what it really is, and it's the pollution that ships cause while in port. They started doing it with heavy particulate matter coming out of ships from their diesel generators and their main engines when ships were using heavy bunker fuel. And look, heavy bunker fuel is a massive pollutant. It's full of heavy metals and everything. And heavy bunker fuel is basically one step away from bitumen in the refining process. It's very heavy oil, and it's um, and ships use it. They heat it up to make it very liquid and combustible, and then they use it because it's a very cheap source of fuel uh, for for large ships. Now, the IMO and has been sneakily moving along the lines of all the shipping fleet out there that still use this, and there is, I forget what it is, at any one point in time sailing on our seas somewhere between 10 and 12,000 ships. It's probably more if you take in intercoastals, but this is ships running around the world doing everything from, containers to dry bulk, to fuels and chemicals and uh, cars, and so for passenger ships and the like. There is a lot of ships, and 90% of all cargo is transported by the oceans. Now, if you wanted to increase the price of goods around the world and you wanted to slow um, and reduce a shipping fleet, which is aging, I must admit, we do have a very aging shipping fleet, especially in the bulk carrier and the heavy transport of liquids. So chemical transporters and oil carriers, they're aging faster than container ships. They're producing more and more container ships because container ships are getting bigger and bigger. You know, it's quite often now that you'll see a container ship that'll be 15 or 16,000 TEUs, or 20-foot equivalent units, so the boxes that go on, where before it used to be 10,000 TEUs, 5,000 TEUs, and so forth. So the shipping industry has got, so it is, and a place like Australia, we rely on shipping like nothing else, right? Everything that we do, whether it's our exports, whether it's our imports, whether it's our food, our fuel, everything comes from shipping. And if you wanted to drive up the prices in a country like Australia, you would increase the cost on that ship. You would reduce the amount of trips coming out, right? Which means that we are so vulnerable to the whims of the idiots behind this. That's why this was so dangerous. Trump has stopped it, and um, at this stage. But when Trump goes, they will bring this back. 100%. Europe is hell bent on destroying the world with all its bloody stupid one world government bullshit. And they will bring back a tax on this if they don't stop and don't get stopped by other people, or other countries don't stand up to the IMO and tell them to piss off. Because if this come through, it would increase our cost of, well, we've got a cost of living crisis now, but our cost of living would go up by probably 3 to 5%, purely and simply because of this tax. And this was not reported in the mainstream media very well at all. They put it on like page 95 of the newspaper and buried it deep inside the online editions. So they can say, yes, we reported it, but it wasn't. This alone would have been a devastating blow to Australia, especially for our exports as well, because a lot of our exports go out on older fleets of bulk carriers. So watch this space, people. This will come back, and it'll come back with a vengeance if we don't get enough government standing up to the IMO. I found this interesting as well. I was reading across different news organizations and different bits of um, info out there, and there's been a lot of studies in the US, and a lot of this has come about since the end of COVID. That the amount of 18, it's really around the 18 to 22-year-olds. So we're talking people in colleges in the US. They're reducing the amount of that they identify as non-binary or transgender. And I've said, is this the end of woke coming? And I believe it could be the start of it, right? And it's going to be, it's a very subset group of people. It tends to be more younger men than women, um, and the whole woke mind virus tends to be deeper in women than it does men at the moment, and especially in this age group. And the other thing that's coming off the back of this is more young men now are reaching out to Christianity and heading towards churches than ever before. Um, the sales of Bibles are through the roof. The attendance to church is going up at great rates. The downloading of online um, Christianity, uh, whether it's a Bible app or a study app or church app, that they're all increasing at vast rates in the vast rate. So over the next few years, we could probably see a massive turnaround in this. And if it's happening at the universities or colleges, as they call them in the US, it will then start to filter down the rest of the way. And we may see a return to normality from the generations that are going to get kicked the most with this sort of stuff. And that's the next lot of generation under this, those that are currently sort of 8 to 12. So let's watch this space. Maybe it's a shining light, maybe it's a false set of data, but let's see. It's a good thing if it is. So on to some stuff here for Australia. And some points here. Australia's just running out of confidence. Um, there is no confidence in this government. The big banks now are openly, um, basically shitting on Jim Chalmers and the economy. Inflation's running back up again. Um, we're seeing the RBA talk about no more rate cuts when they were talking about three. We've got businesses collapsing left, right, and centre. Tomago smelter, only was it 3 months ago, they took money from the government and said that they were here for the long run. Now they're closing shop. There was it Atlassian did another round of cuts to staff. Uh, the retailers are cutting staff, and it's just becoming really bad out there. Payment terms are going out. Government spending is up because the only part of the economy that is really, really pushing forward is the government spending. Payment terms. I've known it in some of the businesses I'm involved in and the people that I talk to that um, where it used to be, 30 days end of month, it's now 60 to 90 days on payments. Small businesses are getting screwed more than large businesses. Large businesses and medium businesses are holding on to their cash longer, which means that small businesses tend to be the ones at the bottom of the rung and they get screwed more. So we're starting to see a lot more small businesses struggle, which means we'll start to see a lot more defaults with sole traders and so forth. One of the other businesses, and I love their mustard pickle, was 3 Threes out of Adelaide. They closed shop this month as well, which was what 30 or 40 people out of work in Adelaide, and that's a 90-year-old business. There was another toilet tissue manufacturer, Go, which was a 60 or 70-year-old businesses. So these companies, the companies that are going belly up or struggling to move forward, are not 5 and 6 year old companies. These are 80, 90, 100-year-old businesses. They are businesses that have been through recessions, depressions. They've been through 4 or 5 downturns. They've seen more governments than most of us will ever see, and they're closing. All right, they've seen the rationalization of business, and they're closing. Now, that just really tells you the state of the economy, and I don't know when Australians are going to wake up and vote these idiots out. I'd rather see have to have a minority government and the government basically can't pass anything for 1 or 2 rounds, than to see the current government keep going the way it's going. Australia will be a holiday out shell, and what will be left is I don't know at this stage, but there is certain industries that are still doing okay. It's tough for them, and they are managing to put their prices up. We're talking some of the food industries around food production that are going direct to consumer. They're cutting out the supermarkets and the middlemen and that sort of stuff. Some of your automotive maintenance people are struggling, but they're surviving because it's a needed service. So some of the needed services, but then you get businesses that are going great guns because they're government funded. Once the money stops, um, and you will see once the money stops, and then these government businesses that are funded by the government don't have their income, you don't have another part of the economy to grow because it's so devastated that it just won't march forward. So it's really, really telling um, in the business world at the moment of just how heartbroken business owners are out there, and how many of them are just saying enough's enough. I'm packing up, going to sit on the beach in Thailand. And there is a lot of that happening as well. So confidence is the biggest thing in an economy, and there is none um, being shown by this government. This is a major shocker. I've said this 3 or 4 times over the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, maybe more, that this is the number one ticking time bomb in this country. There is actually an international treaty out there that says every country should have a reserve of 90 days of fuels at all time to run its economy. Australia, when this was put out, and it was 17th of October, come out around that 17th of October, and it was actually from it was a report by the Climate Change Committee, put out a report about, they put it out saying it's a good thing that Australia has less amount of what they call fossil fuels being used and in supply, but it was actually a warning sign that the country is so close to shutting down. So 24 days of petrol, 28 days of diesel, and that is the big one. Under a month's supply of diesel, where we need diesel more than we need oxygen in this country. Everything is diesel backed. The food we produce, the delivery services, general transport, backup generators for hospitals and all that sort of stuff. Everything is diesel backed. And that level of 28 days of diesel is a massive red flag. 20 days of jet fuel, yeah, we could probably live without it for a little while. Plus, a lot of airlines could actually get fuel from overseas, and they do. But not having jet fuel goes to show you, well, what is our military running on? And our military has probably only got another 10 days, 10 to 15 days of supply on top of this. So they're in a really bad way. Australia used to have 10, 11 refineries in this country, and we're now down to 2. Out of those 2, we'll be losing one shortly, I suspect. And then that'll leave us with 1. And that will, if we're left with 1, we're in all sorts of trouble. Because if the IMO get their way, as I said before, they'll restrict the amount of shipping, and that will cause a shipping crisis in its own, because the petrochemical tankers that supply fuel are normally some of the oldest ones in the fleet. And it takes a while to get this done. Australia sits on a lot of oil and gas, a lot. And you can actually use natural gas to produce fuels, methanol in particular, and you can switch diesel. You could mix diesel with methanol in say a 50-50 mix, and then all of a sudden we've got 56 days of diesel. But we don't produce methanol here. Gas is too expensive, and we don't do other GTL or gas to liquids processing that we could, burning our own coal and so forth. Other countries are doing this, we're not. There is no urgency in Parliament because of their blindness to net zero about how dangerous a situation we are. This is red warning. There should be fucking massive warning signs going off down there in Canberra and even at the state level over this, because one, supply shock, a war breaks out in the Middle East, which is where a majority of our oil and refined product comes from, we are screwed. And we are screwed in a big way. This will stop our economy quicker than anything else, if this is not resolved. And there's no one listening. They're not even listening to their own reports. So we are in serious trouble, because these numbers are going down. The last time I saw numbers 12 months ago, all those had threes in front of them, and now they've got twos in front. So, yeah, really look at fuel. It's the only thing that keeps Australia going. Oh, Victoria, what do we say? Australia's most idiotic government. The passing of this treaty legislation, it's not so much that they're passing treaty legislation, it's that they're passing treaty legislation that is so badly written that it will and could allow the opening of states within states. There is, I was on a podcast the other night listening to a constitutional scholar and a leading lawyer. I've just forgotten her name. She was outstanding, actually, in her takedown of this law. And it's been described as the most dangerous legislation ever put into a parliament in Australia. The legislation is not just for Aboriginal people. The way that it's written, and because Victoria is so hell-bent on not offending anyone, they've created so many holes in this legislation that it could allow a Muslim state, a Hindu state, a left-footed Californian state with their own laws, own rules, own everything inside the state of Victoria. So you could end up with a caliphate, a Muslim caliphate that has absolute destructive tendencies for this country to establish itself. And under these laws, you have no way of fighting and stopping the implementation of what they would implement. Now, that goes for Nazis. It goes for anyone. That the way that these laws are written, anyone that meets the criteria and has enough people could end up creating their own, basically, sovereign entities inside a state. It would create civil war overnight if that was to happen. I honestly hope the people in the upper house in Victoria are getting advice from some great constitutional experts here that understand how badly this law is written. Because if it gets through in Victoria, watch this space that the federal government, with the likes of Murray Farquhar or whatever her bloody name is, won't get hold of this legislation and try and drive it through at a federal level. It is terrifying. Um, the Aboriginal people having their own separate nation, that can be dealt with. There is ways and means to deal with that type of stuff, and it's all over the world. But to allow and intentionally allow legislation that could create um, a sovereign entity to establish that is 100% against our Christian values or the cultural values of this country to grow in its own right is just abhorrent. Um, it is absolutely um, non-Australian in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't meet our the way that our um, country was formed, or even the colonies were formed. And one of the things that we always have to remember is the states are the most important layer of government. Um, the federal government can be neutered by the states, but we don't have any premiers that have the balls to do so. But yeah, what this is something to watch very, very very closely. And if it doesn't get um, knocked out or at least heavily modified in the upper house, um, it will create havoc. Victoria will basically become unlivable. Uh, so yeah, watch this space. It'll be incredible to see what happens. Um, happens with that. Okay. Huh, um, Jim Chalmers can't help himself. He just keeps coming over and over and over again for your super money. This time it's for in industry super. He wants to direct the investments of industry super towards his net zero projects for his mate Bowen. Um, so basically, they'll be providing government mandates on where funds can be invested and what they can and cannot be invested into, which is just stupid. Um, we've just seen in Canada, one of the big funds over there that was directed by the government lost 76% of its value. Um, that is just horrendous because the net zero stuff that it backed all went to zero. Um, we're seeing massive investment funds all through Europe that back these stupid ideals lose tremendous amounts of money. So he just can't keep his hands off super. Um, so yeah, it doesn't matter. They've just got a different ideal. They just think differently. They honestly think anyone with a dollar, and I mean anyone with a dollar, um, is evil. So and it's just getting worse. It really is getting worse. The government uh, has to, at some point in time, um, either implode in a big way and we can start again, or the people have got to come to them senses. And I can't see the people coming to their senses because too many people rely on the handouts from government. So interesting. All right, politics that matters. We're coming to the end of tonight's thing. Federal voting intention. It's pretty much tracking the same way. The Liberals going backwards, Labor slowly picking up, but the middle ground One Nation, Greens, and others are picking up um, the cumulative numbers of people leaving the other thing. Fonds now at 15%, which is huge. Other is 7%, so that's pretty much Rennick's People's First, um, all the other, Katter and all the other little parties. But that number is growing as well. It's positive all the time. ALP still win, and that is because that when you have a look at the distribution of the poll, 60% of One Nation's votes are flowing to the ALP. So uh, it's not as bad as it used to be, but a lot of One Nation's votes still end up going to Labor. So watch this space. The trend is that um, the middle ground or the minor parties are growing, and changes are coming. Now, if we have a look at the war that is causing this, the Libs and Nats are at each other's throats, and they um, are just basically so far apart on ideology inside the factions, inside the actual parties. So the inside the Liberals is probably four factions. Inside the Nats, there's probably two, maybe three. With Barnaby leaving, that's opened the door for a lot of others to look to leave. But the Liberal Party, in its own right, is basically unelectable or unvotable at this stage. Certain parts of the Nationals are still votable, but um, they're dying at a fast rate. There is a very big movement inside the Libs um, for a group of MPs to leave, either to join the Nats or form a new party. So um, it's nearly a direct mirror of 1944 when the Liberals were first established, or back in 1932 when the United Australia Party was established. It's the same era and the same thing. We could see a new party emerge that could include some Labor people. Right? Don't discount that. There is some centre right Labor people of the especially from the Hawke Keating era, or mindset or faction, that would fit inside a new centre right political movement. So watch this space because this is going to happen. Now, nothing may happen um, this side of Christmas purely and simply because to make some of these changes, you actually um, need time for them to happen in the background, or it could happen next week and it would be a spectacular implosion. Um, but Barnaby leaving has opened the door. Um, he possibly will go to One Nation, but he's not going to go there to lead the party. James Ashby and a few others will make sure of that. But watch this space. The more and more One Nation rises, the more and more One Nation's going to slit its own throat. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So the lefties of the Liberals and the Nationals that can't bring themselves to dump net zero want to water it down, but that's not going to stop. As we've seen with Maloney in Italy, and the prime ministers now in Japan, that you've got to be solid on your argument. And the more and more and the longer it goes that these parties can't get their shit together, the more and more they're going to bleed out. And they're going to bleed out in a big way. I believe the Liberal Nationals are dead, gone, buried, and there'll be a new party formed or a current party, and it won't be One Nation, that will be taken over by these people. And the reason I say it won't be one nation is that one nation doesn't have the structure, and I don't think can reform itself quick enough into a structure that is truly needed to be a really strong opposition party. And the reason I say that is you need branches, you need you need a grassroots support team. You need to be able to field candidates in every seat at federal, state, and council elections. And if you know how the Greens and that run, they even go into local community groups and actually build up their base in school PNCs, in other community organisations, sports clubs, where they can have an influence and build a name and all that sort of stuff, and then go into a council and so forth. And that's why we've seen the rise of the known independent or the Teals, because they were big, they were on local communities, they were known, no, they were known people. And that's how Labor and the Greens build a very strong base of and being able to influence in the political sphere when they don't have large votes, and that's because they play the game very well. And the Liberal National Party they stopped playing the game well after John Howard was elected. So the war is happening, and the first shots have been fired. The buildings are on fire, and we've just got to see where it all plans out. As I was saying, the rise of one nation is on. Pretty much every state is now solidly in double digits except Victoria, but even Victoria's had a large jump. And the two leading states are Queensland and South Australia. I found that really interesting that South Australia overtook WA, but it's probably also because WA doesn't have a strong one nation ground game, where they, for some reason, they do very well in South Australia. They have, and it could be small population, people together and that. So the rise is on. Now, is this gonna mean that one nation's going to be at these sort of numbers at the next election? Who knows? I doubt it. People tend to jump on a winner or a rising winner when there's nothing on the line, when it's just a poll. So I expect these numbers to come back, and one nation not to rise, especially if the Liberal National Party does totally implode, which I think they will, and a new party is formed, because it won't be formed around these guys. I have my suspicions of where it's going to be formed, and it could be out of several other parties that have the structure and the constitution to allow it to happen. So one nation's definitely powering ahead, but they're taking place of the coalition because the Liberal Nats aren't there. So people are flocking somewhere. People want to be part of a tribe, and at the moment, one nation's a tribe. And that leads us to this. This is a phenomenon. If it happens here in Queensland, there is a strong possibility that one nation will get a lower house seat, and that's in Wright. Closely followed by Parkes in New South Wales, which I think they would overtake that from the Nats as the war goes on. But if you have a look at where their strength is, it's sucking up, because you can see there it's 2 PC against the ALP, which means they are sucking up all the disenfranchised LNP coalition voters, majority, and they're going to be a force. So, and then that will mean, depending on where the preferences flow, for the Senate, and my last one was the Senate is where the real thing count's going to be. If these flow, if the numbers flow anywhere near this, One Nation will pick up at least another two, maybe three senators. So that's a massive, massive turnout. But as I said, election's still a way away. This is we're seeing these numbers around One Nation because people want a tribe. They literally want a tribe. They want to belong to something. They want to believe in something, um, and One Nation's providing it at the moment. So we will see. We will see. Well, that's it for me tonight. Thank you for listening to me rabbit on. Is there any? No, 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 no. What have we got there? Uh, yeah, that's the Planning Act. Of course, Chalmers. Yeah, of course he can't. Yeah, and that's the problem. Mr. Chalmers can't keep his hand out of the cookie jar. So, all right, guys. Thank you very much. Oops, I've gone on an hour again. Um, I'll be back in a fortnight. So thank you very much, and talk to you soon. Thank you, guys.